A fancy Christmas party takes a dark turn when a pregnant woman is pushed off a fifth floor balcony by the guy who promised to protect her. Everyone thinks it's all over, that she's gone for good. But fate has other ideas because she doesn't hit the ground. She lands on the one car that could save her, owned by her ex-millionaire who still cares for her. What follows is a whirlwind of truth, power, and consequences that will shake up lives and reveal every secret Malcolm tried to keep hidden. Trust me, you won't believe what happens when the truth finally shows up at the penthouse door. Welcome to Voices of Auntie May. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd love it if you hit subscribe and liked my video. Now let's dive back into my story. I think you'll really enjoy it if you stick around till the end. Snow was gently falling through the chilly December air, sparkling under the golden lights of the Vance penthouse. The five-story building towered over the Manhattan skyline like a glass cathedral filled with the sounds of a Christmas jazz quartet and the soft clinking of champagne glasses. Guests dressed in velvet gowns and sharp tuxedos mingled as servers carried silver trays adorned with ornaments and pine sprigs. Everything looked perfect, expensive, and curated to reflect the success Malcolm Vance wanted to project. Imani Harper stood quietly by the balcony doors, resting a hand on her 6-month pregnant belly. The noise inside the penthouse was starting to drown out her thoughts, and for a moment, all she craved was fresh air that didn't smell like pricey cologne or artificial cinnamon. She pushed the door open and stepped outside. The balcony wrapped around the building, framed by glass railings revealing the twinkling city below. Snowflakes landed on her lashes, melting into cold drops that oddly soothed her. She tightened her shawl around her shoulders and took a deep breath, her heart rate finally calming down. She felt like she could think again. The music faded, and then heavy footsteps approached. She recognized the rhythm instantly. Malcolm always walked like he owned the place. "Imani," he called, cutting through the cold air. "What are you doing out here? Guests are asking for you." She turned, trying to keep her face neutral. "I just needed a moment. It's too loud inside." Malcolm stepped out onto the balcony, letting the door close behind him. His cheeks were flushed from drinking, and she could see the tension radiating from him even under his tailored suit. He had been drinking too fast tonight, a familiar pattern, but tonight felt different. "You're embarrassing me," he said in a low voice. "It's Christmas. People expect to see the Vance family united. Not like this, not with you missing." "I'm not hiding," Imani replied softly. "I just needed air." He chuckled under his breath, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was sharp, signaling danger. "Air, of course. That's your excuse every time you can't stand being around people." Her stomach tightened. "Malcolm, I'm pregnant. My feet hurt. I'm exhausted. I'm doing my best." "You always have an excuse," he said, moving closer and smelling of whiskey. "Do you know how many investors are in that room? Do you know how many reporters? Do you know what they think when they see you running off like this?" "What they think doesn't matter to me," Imani whispered. "It matters to me," he shot back, his voice rising but quickly controlled. "You're my wife. You're supposed to support my image, not ruin it." Her back brushed against the glass railing, and she hadn't even realized she was backing up. Malcolm loomed over her, blocking the warm glow of the penthouse behind him. "Malcolm, you're scaring me," she said. He scoffed. "Scaring you? You always exaggerate, Imani. You just had to smile, hold my arm, and act like you belong here. But you disappear. You look miserable. People notice. They talk. They think something's wrong with our marriage while I'm trying to close the deal on Windsor." Imani's pulse quickened. "I'm not trying to ruin anything. You ruin everything without even trying." His eyes dropped to her stomach. "Just look at you." "Malcolm, please let me go back inside. We can talk when you calm down." That word stopped him. "Calm down?" he repeated softly. "You think I'm not calm?" She swallowed, her hands shaking. "Please, for the baby, I'm begging you." Something shifted in Malcolm's expression, the tension in his face growing more dangerous. "You always make me the villain," he whispered. "Maybe you should stop acting like the victim." Before she could respond, Malcolm grabbed her forearm, his fingers digging into her skin. Imani gasped. Imani gasped and tried to pull away, but he stepped forward, pushing her closer to the railing. "Malcolm, stop! You're hurting me." He didn't stop. He shoved her. It happened in an instant, a violent movement that shifted her weight backward. Imani's heels slipped on a patch of snow. Her body tilted. Her arms shot up, searching for something to grab. For 1 second, the world slowed down. She saw the golden lights of the penthouse, the city reflected in the glass, and Malcolm's face frozen between rage and realization. Then gravity took over. Imani fell into the void from the 5th floor. Her scream pierced the icy night as she descended, snow swirling around her like shattered stars. Above, Malcolm stood at the railing, looking down at the disaster he had just caused. Imani's scream had barely faded into the winter air when the music inside the penthouse came to a sudden stop. The jazz quartet was interrupted mid-note, a trumpet hanging in the air as if frozen. Guests looked around, confused at first. Then someone near the balcony screamed, "Oh my God, she fell." The words sliced through the glittering atmosphere like broken glass. A champagne flute slipped from fingers, crashing against the marble floor in a shower of sparkling fragments. The sound echoed, triggering panic. Conversations halted. The mood shifted from celebration to stunned paralysis in an instant. The balcony door was still open, a gust of cold air rushing in, bringing snowflakes and the sharp scent of winter. Tanisha Boyd, who was closest to the entrance, clutched her sequined purse, her painted lips parted in a feigned expression of shock. But a darker flash gleamed in her eyes, something like satisfaction, hidden just enough that only the most observant would notice. "Someone call 911, a man shouted, his voice cracking as he pushed guests toward the railing. A group rushed outside, stepping onto the snow-covered balcony, their breath turning to vapor. When they looked down, some recoiled and covered their mouths, while others leaned over, trying to process what they were seeing on the icy street below. "She's alive," a woman whispered, trembling. "I heard something. Something hit a car," another replied quietly. Phones were raised instinctively, screens lighting up as guests zoomed in on the scene. Some switched to video mode, others activated their flashes. Several people typed emergency messages to 911 with shaking hands fueled by adrenaline. Inside the penthouse, the atmosphere thickened. Voices rose in uneasy waves. Some guests cried while others murmured prayers. A group near the Christmas tree huddled together, staring at the balcony with wide, frightened eyes. In the center of the room, Malcolm re-entered, jaw clenched, snow clinging to his shoulders. His expression fluctuated between shock and panic, though he tried to mask it with something colder and more controlled. "What happened out there?" a man asked him. Malcolm shook his head abruptly. "She fell. She slipped on the snow." His voice was firm, too firm, as if he needed to convince himself more than anyone else. "Imani has been unstable lately," he continued. "You all saw how stressed she was. She's been struggling. She must have lost her balance." Several guests exchanged glances, some skeptical, others too stunned to think, and a few too afraid to say anything. A few nodded cautiously, desperately clinging to an explanation that made sense of the chaos. Tanisha approached Malcolm, gently placing a hand on his arm. Her tone dripped with drama. "Malcolm, this is terrible. I'm so sorry. We all saw how emotional she was tonight. Maybe she just needed help. Maybe she needed rest." Her performance convinced several guests who watched the elegant woman console the powerful host. For a moment, the focus shifted from the tragedy to the spectacle of Tanisha's compassion. Cameras turned toward them, flashes flickering. Some guests began murmuring again, this time about the closeness between the two. Malcolm subtly withdrew his arm, wanting to maintain some distance from her in front of everyone. "Everyone needs to stay inside," he ordered. "Don't go near the railing. The police will be here soon." His words only heightened the unease. People gathered in small groups, whispering and recounting what they had witnessed. A young woman lingered near the balcony door, hands trembling as she held her phone. Her face was pale. She had been close when Imani fell and couldn't shake the image of Imani's body leaning backward into the snowy darkness. "I saw her reach out," she whispered to her friend. "It looked like she was trying to stop herself." Her friend replied shakily, "Maybe she slipped. Maybe the snow made her fall. We have to wait for the police." "Maybe," the first woman said, but her eyes remained fixed on Malcolm, filled with suspicion. On the balcony, some guests were still peering down at the street, their expressions shifting from horror to confusion. Something didn't fit about how Imani had landed. "She looks like she hit a car," someone murmured. "I think she crumpled the hood. Whose car is that?" "I don't know, but thank goodness it was there." Another person zoomed in with trembling fingers. "I think I see movement. She might be alive." A collective gasp rippled through the balcony. Hope that Imani had survived spread like an electric shock, adding a new layer of tension to the already chaotic atmosphere. Some guests rushed back inside to share the news, but instead of relief, they stirred up even more confusion. The idea that Imani had survived meant questions were coming. Many questions, statements, police interviews, video requests. Everyone understood the implications, and Malcolm looked terrified. He swallowed hard, his face draining of color for a moment before he recomposed himself, placing a hand on the back of a chair to steady his breathing. His eyes searched for Tanisha, who was watching him intently, her smile fading as she noticed his panic. "What if she really is alive?" Malcolm whispered, not waiting for an answer because the truth hit him harder than the freezing wind. If Imani survived, everything he planned to say would come crashing down. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer until they blended with the anguished silence of the guests inside the penthouse. And everyone understood that the night had only just begun. The sirens hadn't even reached the building when Malcolm moved deeper into the penthouse, away from the balcony, as if distance could erase the truth of what he had just done. The room was still reeling from shock. Guests whispered in small groups, their faces pale beneath the warm glow of the Christmas lights. Even the jazz musicians stood still beside their instruments, unsure whether to stay or flee. Malcolm ran a hand across his face, smoothing his expression into something calmer, something rehearsed, something that could pass for sadness if viewed from afar. He'd worn a mask for most of his life. Tonight was just another moment to use it. "Please, everyone," he said, raising his voice to reach the nearest guests. "Don't panic. It was an accident. Imani has been under a lot of pressure lately, and she was overwhelmed." A few people looked at him with wide eyes. Some nodded automatically, more out of fear than conviction. Others whispered among themselves, trying to reconcile what they had seen with the explanation he offered. A woman in a red satin dress approached cautiously. "Malcolm, she didn't look overwhelmed," she said, her voice shaking. Malcolm forced a sympathetic smile. "It's Christmas. She was emotional. The baby, the pressure. You know how these things can be. Hormones and exhaustion." The woman's brow furrowed, but she didn't say anything else, stepping back with doubt visible in her eyes. Malcolm exhaled slowly, relieved to have one less person to convince, but there were many more to sway. He headed toward a group of older investors near the Christmas tree, their glasses trembling as they tried to process the chaos. "I'm deeply sorry you had to witness this," Malcolm said in a low, sincere voice. "Imani hasn't been well for months. Stress, anxiety, she's had difficulties throughout the pregnancy." One of the investors frowned. "Difficulties of what kind?" Malcolm hesitated for just a second, enough for his lie to sound real. "Emotional changes, fainting spells. She even told me she felt like she might fall earlier tonight. I should have kept a closer eye on her." The investors exchanged glances. None of them fully believed him, but none dared to challenge him either. He was still the host, the man who signed their contracts, the millionaire who ran projects they depended on. Tanisha appeared by his side, resting a light hand on his arm. The gesture was small, but her presence rippled through the room. People always noticed her. "Malcolm," she whispered softly, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I know this is devastating for you. You tried so hard tonight, you really did." Her voice trembled with a perfectly calculated tone of compassion, her eyes shimmering as if about to fill with tears. It was an act, but a very convincing one. Some guests nodded sympathetically, believing they were witnessing a couple united in tragedy when they were actually observing two accomplices. Malcolm tensed, not wanting to appear too close to Tanisha right now, but he knew her performance helped reinforce the story he needed to sell. "We must wait for the police," he told her quietly, "and remain calm." "Of course," she replied with a slight nod, "whatever you need." On the other side of the room, the young woman who had been near the balcony wiped tears from her eyes. Her friend held her by the shoulders. "I swear she reached out," the young woman said, her voice trembling. She didn't jump. She didn't slip. She reached out like she was trying to stop herself. Her friend looked around nervously. Don't say that too loud. Malcolm is listening. I don't care if he hears me, the young woman whispered fiercely. Something is wrong. I saw her face just before she fell. Malcolm heard her. Despite the distance, her words hit him like a shot. Panic tightened his jaw. He needed to regain control, to shape the narrative before more questions arose. He approached them with a composed expression. Are you two okay? He asked gently. The young woman stiffened. I saw her reach out. Malcolm nodded as if comforting a distressed child. Of course she reached out. Anyone would if they slipped. Imani got too close to the railing. The snow on the balcony made it dangerous. I asked her to come inside. She didn't listen. That's not what it looked like, the young woman shot back, her voice trembling but steady. Malcolm leaned in a little closer. You're shocked. We all are. No one is thinking clearly right now. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture meant to be reassuring, but firm enough to remind her of his power. The young woman held her breath, and her friend gently pulled her back. Malcolm straightened up and quickly turned, signaling to his head of security with a slight nod. Check the cameras, he ordered quietly. Delete everything from the balcony and the hallway. The guard hesitated. Sir, the police might want to, Malcolm growled. Before they arrive, we can't let this turn into a scandal. The guard reluctantly nodded and hurried toward the security office. Near the fireplace, guests murmured uneasily. He wants to delete the cameras. We should say something. Are you crazy? He could ruin any of us. Fear spread through the room like smoke. Everyone understood what Malcolm was trying to do, but no one dared oppose him. Not yet. Tanisha watched him from across the room. For the first time that night, her eyes showed worry, not for Imani, nor for the baby, but for herself. She could see the desperation in Malcolm's movements, the intensity, the cracks in his control. Malcolm, she said, approaching him again, people are starting to question your story. Maybe we should think this through better. He glared at her. Let me handle it. She pressed her lips together before replying calmly. I'm just saying, if she survived... Don't say that, Malcolm spat. She is not alive. But his certainty wavered for a moment, replaced by pure terror. The sirens blared louder. Red and blue lights flickered against the glass walls. The penthouse had become a stage, and everyone in it waited for the curtain to rise. Malcolm inhaled deeply and put his mask back on. He had rewritten the story. Now he needed everyone to believe it. But outside on the street, the truth was already taking shape, much stronger than the lies he was trying to weave within his glittering, sinking world. Tanisha had always loved attention. She thrived on the way eyes followed her when she entered a room, on the whispers that swirled around her, and on the envy blooming like dark flowers in the expressions of other women. Tonight, despite the chaos, she felt that familiar thrill return. The tragedy had shaken the penthouse, but it had also created an opportunity for her, a chance to step forward as the woman beside Malcolm, the one he trusted in a time of crisis, the woman who would soon replace Imani completely. She smoothed her silver dress and breathed slowly, preparing her posture like an actress about to walk on stage. Snowflakes drifted in through the open balcony door, cooling the air and giving the room a slight shimmer. Guests clustered together with concern. No one noticed Tanisha at first, but she planned to change that. Her heels echoed on the marble as she moved toward the center of the room. A few people looked up. She offered a small, sympathetic smile, one that suggested she was suffering too, hinting at an intimate pain only Malcolm could understand. Is everyone all right? Tanisha asked softly. It's been a terrible night. Malcolm is heartbroken. One of the men cleared his throat. This is all very shocking. Yes, she replied, letting her voice tremble slightly. Imani wasn't well. Malcolm tried so hard to help her. He always put her needs first. The men exchanged glances, her words planting seeds of narrative, small seeds that Malcolm desperately needed to grow in the guests' minds. Tanisha tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. He feels responsible, even though it wasn't his fault. I keep telling him he couldn't have foreseen something like this. She paused briefly for the idea to sink in, then smiled politely and added, He's not alone. Several eyebrows rose, whispers beginning. Exactly what she wanted. She then opened her purse and pulled out her phone, tilting it slightly so the screen caught the light. On it was a photo of her and Malcolm, very close, his hand on her waist, their faces near, smiling with an intimate nuance. She didn't directly show the photo, just left it visible long enough for a woman next to her to notice. The woman's eyes widened. "You and Malcolm are." Tanisha offered a modest smile. "It's not official. Not yet." "Not yet," the woman repeated, surprised. "There were plans," Tanisha whispered. "Malcolm wanted to wait for the right moment. Imani had been having problems with her mental health. He didn't want to overwhelm her." The lie tasted sweet. On the other side of the room, Malcolm was arguing with the head of security, but Tanisha wasn't worried. She believed she was helping him, that her presence and story were strengthening him in front of everyone. She thought she was the steady hand he needed. She continued to move through the room, every conversation she touched tinged with the same insinuation. She and Malcolm were the stable ones, while Imani was the problem. Tonight was the tragic culmination of Imani's emotional instability. A middle-aged couple approached cautiously. "Tanisha," the woman asked, "is it true that you and Malcolm have been together for a while?" "People are whispering." Tanisha looked down with a soft sigh, allowing her expression to become vulnerable. "We never wanted it to happen this way. Malcolm tried to keep everything as respectful as possible for Imani, but sometimes life is complicated. You think you'll never find true love again? And then suddenly—" The woman touched her arm. "So you love him?" Tanisha nodded slowly. "I do." The room absorbed those words. Confusion mingled with curiosity, sympathy mingled with unease. Some looked moved, others scandalized, but everyone was listening, and that was enough for her. Later, she walked back toward the balcony door. The cold wind brushed against her bare shoulders. Snowflakes glittered in the light, making the scene seem almost magical, as if tragedy and glamour were trying to coexist. A young couple near the railing overheard Tanisha speaking softly to another woman. "The truth," she said, lowering her voice even further, "is that Malcolm told me he planned to file for separation after Christmas. He wanted to give Imani a gentle transition. She wasn't in a good place, and he didn't want to pressure her while she was pregnant." The young guests exchanged incredulous looks. "And the ring he gave me," Tanisha added softly, "he told me not to wear it until after the holidays." She touched her finger as if an engagement ring rested there. More whispers, more murmurs. Eyes followed her every move, but beneath the surface of her radiant confidence, a thread of fear ran down her spine. The police were close. Imani might survive. The truth could rise faster than the lie she was weaving. For now, however, she still commanded the room, molding the story into something she could control. She presented herself as Malcolm's future, his support, his stable companion in the middle of a crisis. But she didn't yet understand that everything she had just said would soon return to destroy her. The truth was climbing the building stairs, alive and coming for her, and it wouldn't be kind. The sound of the sirens grew louder, echoing against the tall buildings outside. Blue and red lights flickered through the penthouse's glass walls, staining the marble floors and the anxious clusters of guests. A cold wave of dread swept through the room as everyone realized the night had crossed a line that could never be erased. A woman had fallen 5 stories, a pregnant woman, and the police were minutes away. Malcolm felt the weight of every second pressing against him. His heart pounded hard in his chest, palms cold with sweat. He needed control. He needed silence. He needed the story to make sense before anyone else shaped it. First, he moved to the center of the room and clapped once forcefully. The sound sliced through the air like a warning shot. "Listen to me," he said in a low but commanding voice. "Everyone needs to stay calm and stay inside. The police will have questions, and we need to be on the same page." Some guests frowned, others remained motionless. "On the same page about what?" a man asked. Malcolm offered a strange smile. "About the truth." Imani slipped. There was snow on the balcony. You all saw how overwhelmed she was tonight. A murmur went through the room. Some nodded cautiously, grasping for a simple explanation, while others hesitated, exchanging looks loaded with suspicion. Malcolm's eyes sharpened at those expressions. He approached the man who had questioned him. "If you spread a story that contradicts the truth, I will hold you accountable for slander. Understood? The man swallowed. I didn't mean anything. I just thought. That's why I'm telling you now, Malcolm interrupted. The room tensed, fear spreading like smoke. Tanisha stood behind Malcolm, her face carefully molded into a mask of concern. Her eyes darted nervously among the guests, feeling the shift in the atmosphere, the growing distrust. Malcolm felt it too, and it made him reckless. He raised his voice again. Every person in this penthouse is a witness to tonight, and everyone has a reputation to protect. If a false narrative spreads, if someone insinuates there was negligence or anything more, your names will be linked to it. I will personally make sure of that. The threat hung heavy over the room. A woman near the bar whispered, He's threatening everyone. Her husband grabbed her wrist, murmuring, Not now, don't draw attention. Malcolm heard the whisper, his jaw tightening. This is not a threat. It's common sense. There are cameras in the lobby. This will be a media spectacle. If you want your faces on the news for lying about a tragic accident, go ahead. But if you respect yourselves, keep silent and wait for the facts. He pronounced the word facts with calculated emphasis, as if his version was the only possible truth. The head of security approached urgently. Sir, the police are at the main entrance. Don't let them up, Malcolm ordered. Tell them I'll go down to speak with them. The guard hesitated. They said it's urgent. She might still be alive. The room reacted instantly. A few guests brought their hands to their mouths, Tanisha holding on to the back of a chair. Several exchanged alarmed glances. The possibility that Imani had survived changed everything. Malcolm felt his blood freeze. She's alive, the guard repeated softly. They're trying to stabilize her. Malcolm stared at him, momentarily speechless, his heart racing. Panic rose inside him like a tide. If Imani survived, she could talk. She could accuse him. She could destroy him. He turned toward the crowd, trying to appear stable. Everyone remained calm. This changes nothing. Imani probably fell onto something that cushioned the fall. Nothing more. But the guests no longer looked at him with uncertain sympathy. They regarded him with suspicion, doubt, sensing that his story wasn't the whole truth. Malcolm instantly perceived the change. He took a step forward and raised his voice. I want to make this clear. If anyone speaks to the police before I explain the situation, I will take legal action. I will personally ensure to trace every lie back to its source. A man near the windows confronted him, his voice trembling with anger. Why are you trying to control what people say? If it was really an accident, what does it matter who speaks first? Malcolm's eyes flashed with fury. Because people panic, people distort, and some of you don't even know what you saw. A woman stepped forward. I saw her reach out. That didn't look like a slip. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to her. Malcolm approached slowly with a thin, dangerous smile. You're distraught, he said softly. I understand, but you will not repeat that to the police. It is inaccurate and dangerous. What's dangerous is you telling us what we can or cannot say, she responded, her voice trembling but firm. Malcolm leaned in slightly. Don't tempt me, ma'am. Several guests flinched. Tanisha looked away, pretending not to have heard. Malcolm straightened up and spoke to the entire room. I built my reputation from the ground up. I've funded half the charities in this city. I've invested in some of your companies, and I'm telling you now, if anyone invents stories that harm me or my family, you will regret it. Some people stepped back, while others lowered their gaze. Fear descended upon the room like a heavy curtain. The head of security returned. Sir, the police insist. They're already coming up. Malcolm clenched his fists. Fine, but no one says a word until I explain the truth. He looked around, examining every face in the penthouse. He saw fear, doubt, and for the first time that night, something else, people beginning to slip from his control. Outside, the police were seconds away from knocking on the penthouse door, and Malcolm's world was starting to crack. The elevator chimed faintly, and all conversations inside the penthouse crumbled into terrified silence. The polished steel doors slid open, revealing 2 police officers, a paramedic, and the building manager. Red and blue lights from the street flickered against the walls, casting an uneasy glow. The festive decorations, the twinkling tree, the champagne fountains, all of it now looked grotesque. Christmas cheer had become a backdrop for catastrophe. Malcolm inhaled deeply, stepping forward as if welcoming honored guests. He straightened his jacket and forced a calm smile, though the tension in his jaw betrayed him. "Officers," he said courteously, "thank you for coming. It was a terrible accident. I can explain everything." The lead officer, a tall woman with piercing eyes, raised a hand. "We'll speak with you in a moment. Right now, we need to confirm information about the victim. I understand she is your wife." Malcolm nodded, rehearsing a look of pain. "Yes," Imani slipped. Before he could add anything else, the paramedic stepped forward with a clipboard in hand, his face pale but steady. "Sir, your wife is alive." The words exploded in the room. A murmur of shock swept through the penthouse. A champagne glass fell from someone's hand and shattered against the marble. Tanisha's knees buckled and she held on to the edge of a table to keep from falling. Her eyes widened in horror as if she'd been told a ghost had crawled out of the snow. Malcolm felt the world tilt. His stomach dropped and his breath froze in his chest. "Alive? Are you sure?" The paramedic nodded. "She fell onto the hood of a vehicle. The impact was severe but not fatal. Someone called 911 immediately." A man near the window muttered, "That car saved her." Another asked, "Whose car was it?" Before anyone could answer, the paramedic continued. She regained consciousness for a few moments. She was able to speak. She said someone pushed her. The room erupted, gasps, hands covering mouths, guests backing away from Malcolm like he was fire. Malcolm vehemently denied it. "She's confused. She must be confused. She slipped. I told her to come inside." The officer moved closer. "You said she slipped, but we haven't finished collecting statements. Several guests reported seeing something different." Malcolm's face tensed. "What guests? What did they see?" The officer's eyes scanned the crowd behind him. Some lowered their gaze, others looked at him with open fear, and a few appeared ready to speak. Tanisha tried to regain control, walking toward Malcolm, gently taking his arm and speaking in a soft voice full of false sadness. "Imani was very emotional. You have to understand. She's been suffering. Malcolm did everything he could to help her." A woman near the balcony retorted forcefully, "Stop lying. You were bragging 10 minutes ago that you were seeing him." The room froze. Tanisha's cheeks flushed as her mask of false sorrow cracked. "That's not true. I never said that." "Yes, you did," another guest replied. "We all heard you. You showed pictures of you and Malcolm. You said you had plans. You said he was going to file for separation." Tanisha's hands trembled as she took a step back, her performance collapsing. The officers observed every detail. Malcolm's fury erupted. "Everyone calm down. You're twisting things. None of this helps Imani." But no one was listening to him. The story he had tried to build crumbled before his eyes. The officer addressed the guests. "Anyone who saw or heard anything relevant, we will speak with you privately." Voices erupted. "I saw her reach out. She looked terrified. I saw Malcolm grab her arm. She told him to come inside, and then he shoved her." Malcolm watched in horror as his story fell apart, his confidence, his threats, his web of lies, all crumbling as witnesses found the courage to speak. Quentin took one last step toward him and lowered his voice so only Malcolm could hear. "Your control ends tonight." Malcolm's breathing stopped. His eyes swept the room, searching for allies who no longer existed. The officer approached. "Mr. Vance, you will have to come with us for questioning. You have the right to remain silent." Guests made way as Quentin watched Malcolm being escorted away, pale and trembling. In that moment, the balance of power shifted. Quentin had arrived. The truth had arrived, and the world Malcolm had built on lies was beginning to crumble piece by piece. Thanks to a woman who survived, the police escorted Malcolm toward the elevator, while the entire penthouse watched in stunned silence. His confident stride was gone. His shoulders slumped, breathing fast and irregular, hands trembling despite his attempts to hide it. The red and blue lights from the street illuminated his face, painting it with frantic colors that revealed the truth he had tried to bury since Imani fell. He looked back once, hoping to see an ally among the crowd, but all he found were eyes filled with suspicion, disappointment, and fear. Someone whispered, "I always knew there was something off about him." Another muttered, "He's finished." The words lingered in the air like smoke. Tanisha stood motionless near the bar, trembling so hard that her bracelet clinked against the glass she held. She looked at Malcolm with a mix of shock and terror. Minutes earlier, she had envisioned a future with him, filled with wealth, status, and influence. Now she only saw a man accused of a violent crime, a man whose world was collapsing so fast she could almost hear the seams ripping. When the elevator doors closed on Malcolm, the penthouse erupted into chaos. Officers spread through the room, organizing witnesses into lines for questioning. Phones vibrated, and guests whispered with frantic excitement. A reporter invited to cover the party discreetly sent messages to her editor. The scandal was already growing, racing out into the world faster than anyone could stop it. Downstairs, Malcolm was placed in the back of a patrol car. His breath fogged the windows as he looked out at the snowy streets. Police radios crackled with updates. The officer in the passenger seat spoke into the microphone. Suspect is in custody, transporting for interrogation. The word suspect echoed in Malcolm's mind. He had been called many things in his life: entrepreneur, millionaire, visionary, but never suspect, never criminal, never monster. And now, every label that defined his life was melting away like ice between his fingers. He clenched his jaw. "I didn't push her," he murmured. "She slipped. She slipped." But the image of Imani reaching out returned to his mind, the shock in her eyes, the fear, and then the fall. The agent driving glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "You'll have a chance to tell your side, but if the security video shows what we believe it shows, you're in serious trouble." Trial. The word pierced Malcolm like a blade. Trial meant lawyers, reporters, jury selection, and more recordings. Trial meant everything he had built could be publicly destroyed. Trial meant Imani would have a platform to tell her truth. And that terrified him more than anything else, because Imani was alive, and she remembered. Elsewhere in the city, reporters gathered outside Mercy General Hospital. Cameras flashed, microphones were raised, and headlines were prepared. The fall hadn't destroyed Imani, but it had destroyed Malcolm, and the world was just beginning to watch him fall too. The morning light slowly streamed through the windows of Mercy General Hospital, replacing the cold blue darkness with a warm golden glow. It was the first peaceful light Imani had seen in months, the first light that didn't feel like a spotlight on her, every mistake, the first light that felt like hope instead of fear. She lay propped up on a pile of pillows, wrapped in a warm blanket, breathing gently as the steady heartbeat of her baby resonated from the monitor beside her. Her body ached in places she didn't know could hurt. Her ribs throbbed when she inhaled too deeply, her arms covered in bruises, and a delicate cut marked her forehead. But she was alive. Her son was alive. That alone felt like a miracle. Outside her room, reporters waited behind police tape. Volunteer nurses whispered her name with admiration. Social workers passed by offering aid and resources, and officers guarded the hallway. Everything around her had shifted from danger to safety, from chaos to order, from isolation to support. Quentin stood by the window, his silhouette outlined by the sunlight. He wore a simple sweater and jeans, a stark contrast to the formal coat of the previous night. His eyes were tired but held the same firm intensity that had sustained him through the worst night of her life. When he turned to her, his expression softened. "You look better," he said quietly. Imani smiled faintly. "A little. The doctor said we were lucky." Quentin approached her bed and sat in the chair beside her. "I'm not leaving until you tell me to." "Thank you," she whispered, grateful. He shook his head. "You shouldn't have had to call me. You should have been safe with the man you married." "I was never safe with him," she whispered. "I know," he replied, wiping a tear from her cheek. "But you are safe now. The police have everything they need, the recordings, the witnesses, the security logs. He won't be able to lie this time." She nodded slowly. "I know. I heard the officers a while ago. They said they're charging him with attempted murder." "That's right," Quentin confirmed. "And they're interrogating Tanisha too. She knew more than she admitted. She'll have to face her own consequences." Imani exhaled deeply, the weight she had carried for so long beginning to slide off her piece by piece. For the first time, she could imagine a life without Malcolm's voice in her ear, without his anger, without his control, without the constant fear of disappointing or provoking him. A nurse entered with a warm smile. "Good morning, Imani. Your vitals are strong and your baby is stable. Thank you. Imani felt grateful. The nurse left the room, and the word home hung in her mind. But the penthouse was not a home. Life with Malcolm was not a home. She needed something new, a place where fear couldn't reach her, where she could breathe again. Quentin noticed her hesitation. "You can stay with me," he said softly. "Not forever, not unless you want to, but until you decide where you want to go, you can stay at my place. It's secure, private, and no one will touch you." Imani looked at him with tired but grateful eyes. "I would like that." The door opened again, revealing a police officer who approached Imani's bed with a respectful nod. "Imani, I wanted to inform you that Malcolm Vance was denied bail. He will remain in custody as we proceed with the charges. We will coordinate protective measures with you. You won't have to face this alone." Imani let out a sigh she didn't know she was holding. "Thank you. We also recommend a restraining order. Although in this case it's just a formality. He won't be near you ever again." The officer softened her tone. "You are very strong. What happened to you was not your fault." Imani nodded, emotions swelling in her chest. "Thank you for saying that." The officer left and closed the door. Imani brought a hand to her belly, feeling her baby move. "I want a quiet life for this baby," she whispered. "A life without fear, without chaos, without Malcolm." Quentin smiled softly. "You'll have it. I promise." The room enveloped in a comforting silence as the sunlight warmed the white sheets. Imani felt a calm she hadn't experienced in years. She was no longer the woman who walked into a penthouse with a fake smile and trembling hands. She was no longer the wife trying to fix a man who only wanted to break her. She was no longer the woman pleading to be heard on a balcony. She was a survivor, stronger than she ever imagined. And now she held her future in her hands. Hours later, when she was discharged, Quentin pushed her in a wheelchair through the lobby. Reporters tried to rush toward her, but officers kept them at bay, cameras flashing. Imani kept her gaze forward. She wouldn't hide anymore, but she also wouldn't let their noise destroy her peace. Outside, the snow was gently falling. The world seemed clean and new. Imani inhaled the cold air, feeling the promise of a different life settling in her heart. As Quentin guided her toward his car, she whispered, "This is the beginning, isn't it?" He looked at her with warmth and certainty. "Yes, this is your beginning." She took his hand, stepping into her new life, and for the first time in a long time, Imani felt free. "I'm really glad you're here and that I could share my story with you. If you liked it, show me by liking the video and subscribing to my channel. Let's see how many of us there are. Write in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is. I'm so curious about where all you wonderful people are tuning in from."